All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast. We are your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. My name is Robert Winfrey, and I am your host, per usual. Um, Boy, we might have a long one today. You'll know if that's true or not because you can see the runtime. What do we got tonight? We're going to review UFC on ABC 8, the UFC's debut in Azerbaijan, and kind of what it was. We'll talk about it. We have a preview for International Fight Week, UFC 317, two title fights, and used to be one of the pillars of the MMA calendar, but I'm not sure those even exist anymore as a concept. And then news, because boy did we have some news. We'll see how much. I have a few different things written down here as possible talking points. There's only one I really have to get to. The others I might scuttle if I'm not feeling it by the time I get to them. So anything you can do to interact with the product is always appreciated. Like, comment, subscribe, star rating, written review. You all know the drill with that. So let's jump into it, shall we? UFC on ABC 8. Again, this was an earlier morning card because it was prime time in Azerbaijan. How do we do prediction-wise? I changed my mind on one of these. Which one? God, what was it? It was a stupid one. But I woke up. It's one of those where I went back through some of the stats on the fighters and just kind of went, wait, what? Alexeva and Seguya. So I looked back at that one, and the 8-year age gap jumped out at me because that's a big gap. And I didn't realize how long Alexeva had been out. So that one I swapped. Everything else I just let ride, and we went 9-3 at the end of the day. Any of those I feel good about? Honestly, not really. Um, we had some decent fights, but do any of those I feel really good about predicting? No, most of those were favorites. What did I get wrong that I should have given Ko a better shot against Elliott. Elliott's when he's really on, he looks good, but I wasn't familiar enough with Ko, and that's on me. Um, Hamdi and Usman was just a god awful fight. Okay, here's the one that annoyed me. Daria Zlezniakova beating Melissa Mullins. Here's the thing about Melissa Mullins, and I remembered this 2 minutes into the first round. What she is good at, she is very good at. Her top control, her ground and pound, her passing, all legitimately top shelf, really good stuff. Every bit of it. But everything that's supposed to get her to that point, man, it's not good, and everything else about her game is kind of just bad. And there's just something about how she interacts with how her game plays out somewhere in my head that I forget how bad she is at so much of it. Um, it's really, really weird in that respect. So yeah, that one annoys me. I way, way, way overestimated her because what she's really good at, she is really, really good at. But you just kind of forget the stuff she's not good at, and she's not good at a lot of this stuff. So that one bothered me. So yeah, as far as the year goes, we are now 190, 61 and 1 with one no contest. Doing okay. Doing okay as far as the predictions go. So we're about at the halfway mark for the year, and I'm well over 50%, so thumbs up on that. I'm happy. All right, as for the fights themselves, let's get into this. So, main event, Khalil Roundtree defeats Jamal Hill via unanimous decision, 149-46 to 50-45s. Um, I don't have a whole lot to say about this. They traded some early calf kicks, but that's not a game that you can win with Khalil Roundtree for the most part. Like, there's guys who can outkick him. Jamal Hill isn't one of them. Once Jamal Hill was stuck trying to fight Orthodox, his game is just not at all the same. His footwork, it's always been kind of bad. Um, yeah, it's always been kind of bad. And I give him a little bit of a pass for it kind of breaking down in this fight down the stretch because his legs got messed up due to leg kicks, and that will screw with it. So I'm not trying to kill the guy for it. Let me rephrase. I know there are mitigating circumstances here. So I am not trying to say that there's no reason that it one of the other reasons it got worse down the stretch was what Khalil was doing. But that's always been kind of a weakness of his game. And somebody pointed this out. He got told between rounds 4 and 5 by his coaches, like, you're losing. And he looked at them like they had just grown a second head. Like, just couldn't even fathom that he needed a finish. Like, needed a finish. And somebody else at that point went, at best it's close, man. We need this round. Look, I give a lot of coaches a lot of slack with what you tell your fighters. As long as you're not giving them, like, completely inaccurate technical advice, or you're making some really boneheaded tactical call, and bear in mind, when I say really boneheaded, I mean you've got to be like, okay, I want you to pull guard on this guy, kind of boneheaded. I give them wide latitude because what you have to do is talk to your fighter in a way that they will understand, in a way that maximizes the desired response. Sometimes that's honesty. Some fighters respond best to honesty. Some do not. Some you have to cheerlead. Some, even if they're down, you tell them they're up because that's what gets them to the place they need to be to perform their best. But when you're a fighter and your coach tells you you're losing, his reaction to it was not correct. I get that you may not like hearing that. I really do. But man, you should have a better reaction than that. This really felt weird. His reaction. So what else did we get here? Khalil Roundtree just the better technical striker, and once he'd kind of broken down some of Hill's work with leg kicks, he just outpointed him basically. This was not a very entertaining fight, but dude, Khalil Roundtree throwing like standing hammer fists. The the reality is that with the wide spectrum of what you can do in MMA, there's a lot of stuff that hasn't been explored. And the standing hammer fist as part of combinations is one of them that everyone kind of points and laughs, like, oh, look at that, throwing a standing hammer fist. Isn't that silly? Well, if it works, is it that silly? Yeah, it doesn't look all that refined. Mostly because when you train a lot of this, you train boxing fundamentals. And boxing doesn't let you hammer fist. Boxing doesn't let you back fist either. Not even, well, you can't do a spinning, you can't do any kind of back fists in theory because you're only supposed to punch with the front of the glove, not the back of the glove. If you're sneaky about it, you can maybe get some flicking jabs going and blur that line just a hair, but that's a whole other thing. There's a lot, point being there's a lot in MMA that I appreciate that there's some people willing to just acknowledge that we haven't explored the full extent of what's possible, and not all conventional wisdom really holds up in MMA. So, he landed a few good punches. He dropped Hill a couple of times. Like I don't know what to do with Jamal Hill at this point. I think he came back too soon from that Achilles injury that made him give up the belt. And he's still been trying to put the pieces back together since then, and he hasn't quite got there. Roundtree, says he wants a title fight. That seems unlikely, but I don't think it's impossible for him to be in the vicinity. Who did I see the suggestion of him fighting? Because I saw a suggestion I really liked. Hang on. So, where is it? There you are. Because he was 7. He's going to be, you know what? Him and Olberg might have been it. Or him and Yuri. That was it. The suggestion of him and Yuri Prochazka. Just like the combination of two violent weirdos. I mean that like stylistically weird. They're both unorthodox, and I say that with love. But I'd be curious about that. That one, Carlos Olberg is going to need an opponent. Hill's going to drop from this. I don't know what you do with Hill. Maybe. Okay, no, this is the other one I saw. Jamal Hill and Dominic Reyes. I think is something you could look at. I mean, you could do Hill, and who else could you do down there? Rakic will need a fight soon. Uzdemir. Asmat Mirzakhanov is due a bigger fight. It's a big jump because Mirzakhanov is currently 11. Now Hill's going to drop. But I doubt he drops to like 8. But Mirzakhanov and Hill, I mean, here's the reality. Like, Hill's on a, 3-fight skid now? Fighting the number 11 guy is not outside the realm of possibility if he drops to like 6 or 7. Just throwing it out there. So, some ideas there. Yeah, not a terribly exciting main event, but, I've seen worse. Co-main event, I really enjoyed this fight, actually. Rafael Fiziev defeats Ignacio Bahamondes via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the boards. Something weird about this one from Bahamondes. I get that with his frame, because he's a dude 6'3" at lightweight. Like, he is bonkers. He's taller than Khalil Roundtree. I get that with his length, kicking is a big part of his game. And just because you're fighting someone who's really, really good at dealing with kicks doesn't mean you don't throw them. Or that you're not willing to throw them. You should be. But that felt like all he had in this fight. I mean, occasionally he'd throw some stuff in close, but like most of what he was doing was just, okay, here's the kicking game. And respectfully, man, Fiziev, a big part of what Rafael Fiziev does really, really well is avoid kicks and counter them and mitigate them. And it just, if that's the majority of your offensive game, and for Bahamondes it felt like the majority of his offensive game, you're never going to beat Fiziev that way. Some nice body work from Fiziev. Again, this is a good little fight, nothing super memorable. Heavyweight. Curtis Blades defeated Rizvan Kuniev via split decision, 29-28. Again, one for Kuniev, 2 for Blades. You could have given this to Kuniev. I don't think that's wrong. Blades says that he tore his MCL, some kind of a knee injury in the first, and it really affected him in rounds 2 and 3. I'm sure it didn't help if he legitimately suffered a knee injury. I'm sure something happened. But, is it actually the MCL? Well, that's a very specific diagnosis. It's not impossible that he got it right, but something in his knee got tweaked. No problem believing that. And because his takedown game after that was just, I mean, Kuniev was pretty good about stopping him anyway, but it was almost non-existent from Blades after that. So, Blades said he wants to fight Cyril Gane after this. I don't know. Look, I had a line for Ovince St. Preux for a lot of years. Not a lot of years, but actually, yeah, kind of a lot of years, actually, now that I think about it. If you're used to being a young, talented prospect, even a young, talented contender, a young, promising fighter, right? At a certain point, you're neither young nor promising anymore. I said that about Ovince St. Preux because there was a long time when he was one of those guys that you kind of looked at, like, man, there's a lot of athletic potential there, got good power, and he kind of coasted on that for a long time. And I'm not saying I was the first guy to start going, you're not young and promising anymore, man. You kind of just the cement's settled. You are who you are. But I said it before a lot of other people, just for the record there. I'm starting to feel that way about Blades. Like, there's not a lot of good wrestlers at heavyweight, but at this point, he's 34. Now, it's heavyweight, so again, not quite the same as other weight classes, granted. But he's also been in the UFC since 2016. Now, his only loss, his losses aren't that bad. He's got two losses to Francis Ngannou. He lost to Derek Lewis, lost to Sergey Pavlovich, and lost to Tom Aspinall. Like, okay, those are two of those are champions. You're not dealing with bums there, but he's just kind of never really leveled up. And it's 9 years into the UFC. How close is he to? Hang on. So I said his debut was his first loss to Ngannou. It was April of 16. So yeah, we're well over 9. Um, that's just. He's had injuries and other issues, and it's hard. It's just a really, really hard thing to keep doing. And I don't know that he's ever really gonna get there, especially if his knee's actually that hurt. We'll find out more, obviously, a little bit later, but yeah. Catch weight of 165, because both Mektabek Oralbay and Tafik Masayev kind of went, I don't want to make 155. So they agreed to a catch weight of 165. Oralbay in particular, I think, was the one who instigated that, and man, you've got to be able to make weight if you signed a fight in a weight class, but he defeated Tafik Masayev via Kimura, 435 of the first. Some fun grappling exchanges, but nothing like super interesting. Masayev, unfortunately, just got to the UFC a little bit late. He had a couple of good runs in Bellator, a good run in Rizin. Like, Tafik Masayev is a legitimately talented fighter, but I don't know. It feels like he's a little bit aftermarket by the time he got to the UFC, and Oralbay showed off a bit more of his wrestling. He's still got some stuff to offer. He's young too, so there's that. Next up at lightweight, Nazim Sadikov defeated Nicholas Mota via TKO, punches, elbows at 4:17 of the second. This was your fight of the night, deservedly so. These two also only got the only performance bonuses. More on that later. This was fun. Early on, Sadikov did kind of his usual stuff. Mata then hurt him to the body. Got him against the cage, really looked to tee off, but couldn't get anything, like, couldn't quite find a kill shot. He was hoping the volume would kind of overwhelm Sadikov, or at least prompt the ref to get in there, but when it got to the point when it was looking a little bit like that, Sadikov threw back, got him to back off. I actually had Sadikov winning the first round. He came back and he did some good work. He hurt Masayev. Not Masayev, excuse me. He hurt Mota. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong notes. Then second round, more of the same. Just a lot of infighting, pocket exchanges, dirty boxing. Sadikov started landing elbows. Finally, he just kind of hurts Mota, gets him against the fence, drops him, gets the finish. Good win for Sadikov. Nazim Sadikov. Lightweight stacked. It's hard to make a real push, but he's a fairly talented guy if he can sort out some of his early defensive issues. At featherweight next, Muhammad Naimov defeated Bogdan Grad via unanimous decision, 29-28. Okay fight, a lot of clinching, a lot of both guys like stopping takedowns and resulting in clinch work. And nothing super going on there. That was the main card. On the prelims, Seokyun Ko defeated Oban Elliott via unanimous decision, 30-27. Really impressed with Ko. A lot of forward pressure early. He's got a little bit of an open chin. Somebody's going to make him pay for that. It wasn't Elliott tonight. Or excuse me, for this card, I shouldn't say tonight. Wasn't Elliott on this night, but uh, somebody might. But Ko's got good power, very, very strong, very athletic, good judo throws, good top control when he got Elliott down. Just a really, really solid performance from Seokun Ko. So, gonna be paying attention to that guy. Middleweight, boy, do we have to talk about this one a little bit. Jun-Young Park, the Iron Turtle, defeats Ismail Narudiev via unanimous decision. Two 29-26s and a 29-25. How did we get there? So the first round is a fairly standard round. There's one eye poke to Park. It's the kind of eye poke that happens a bit too frequently for my taste, but you also kind of understand that sometimes that happens. Wound up being a little bit of a second eye poke down the stretch. Wasn't as bad as the first one, if memory serves, but two pokes, I've gotten kind of the point where, like, if you do that twice, I think your point should be deducted just on principle. Second round, um, Narudiev is able to. They have some interesting wrestling exchanges. Narudiev was real quick to grab front headlocks, which is not a bad thing, to kind of just wrap the upper body. And he uses one of those to kind of ride Park down to a knee against the fence. And then Park still has a knee down, and Narudiev knees him in the head. Illegal, horribly illegal. Cuts Park around the left eye, and the referee, of course, halts the action. Winds up taking 2 points, which is, for the record, totally justified. Let me tell you my preference for this. I would have just disqualified Narudiev. Look, Park was hurt from that knee. His eye, he barely was able to open it by the time that we got to, like, hey, can you open your eye? Not swollen shut, but like when your eye gets damaged like that, there's a muscular spasm that can occur where it closes and you don't always have it's a spasm. You don't have control over it. Trying to get it to relax to the point where you can open your eye is a thing. And you had a little bit of that going on. Then to try and figure out if he was okay to continue, we had a little bit of there's a kind of a famous I Love Lucy sketch where Lucy's trying to communicate with someone who doesn't speak English. And we get like a game of telephone with translation. Because she talks with Ricky, her husband, who speaks English and Spanish. Then he speaks Spanish to someone who speaks Spanish and the language that this original person that Lucy's trying to talk to speaks. There might have been another one in there too. But there's at least two people. This was sort of spoofed on The West Wing briefly, much as I don't care for that. That show has really aged like milk in my estimation. But you got this like, okay, I don't speak your language, but we've got these two people who have one overlapping language, and we're just going to kind of telephone that back and forth. It's a real funny sketch. You know, I Love Lucy was a great show. I watched a lot of Nick at Night when I was a kid. That's where I found a lot of that stuff. So I remember that one. Here was the problem we had. We have a referee. This was Łukasz Bosaki, who does not. I'm not saying he doesn't speak English. He does, but that's not his first language. He's a native Polish speaker. So he does okay with English, but it's clearly his second language. So you've got him. You have Park, who speaks Korean. You have the cage-side physician, who I think was a native, like a local guy to Azerbaijan, so he would speak, like either Russian or Azeri. I think Azeri is the primary language there. Hang on. I wish to confirm that. Why are you making this difficult? There was actually an exchange student when I was in high school who was from Azerbaijan. Yeah, the official language there is Azerbaijani, so I think he said it was Azeri. So that's kind of its own thing. Now, I imagine there's enough there might be enough like overlap where people speak either Russian or a little bit of I'd say Arabic, but it's a majority. I believe it's a majority Muslim country. But anyway, yeah. So so you had that guy who does not really speak English. It sounds like, and it's just a little bit like almost a comedy of errors. Not fully, but ultimately they say Park can continue, which I'm not sure he could. He winds up winning, so bear with me for just a second though. Whether or not he's physically able to is not always the point. His eye was messed up pretty badly. Um, to the point where I think the fight should have been stopped and you just DQ Narudiev and we're done. But Park guts through it, bless him. Starts to get his wrestling game going, just slow and steady wins the race, man. And then the third round is all him. You could give him a 10-8 in the third. In fact, I did. And he gets the win, but man, he got messed up here. You know, the fouls were a real problem. And we lost a lot of time on the fouls. I mean, it was 4 minutes, I think, and change before we got a ruling after the illegal knee. This whole broadcast was behind. There's only 2 finishes on this entire card. I already talked about them. So we were just real behind timing-wise. But as I've mentioned before, I have a soft spot for Jun Young Park, and the poor guy got fouled. You know, you get kneed in the head illegally. I have a great deal of sympathy. Now, I am of the opinion that knees to the head of a fighter in that position should be legal, but I don't have. My my advice there and my stance is not everyone ignore the rule because I don't like it. I would lobby to change the rule to allow knees to the head of a downed opponent. But until or unless you're fighting in a rule system where that is legal, play by the rules, for crying out loud. A lot of fence grabbing last night, too. A lot of fence grabbing. Anyway. Next up, Daria Zlezniakova defeats Melissa Mullins via unanimous decision. 129-28, 230-27s. You could have given Mullins the first. She gets beat up on the feet. Neither woman has great defense. But Mullins just kind of gets cracked early and never seems to really get her head back in the game. She gets a takedown near the end of that round, goes for an armbar that, had it been closer, I think I did give Mullins the first. I thought she stole it, but yeah, her takedown game is not great. When she gets to the mat, her game is really, really good. Her ground and pound is very dangerous. Her submission game is pretty solid. Like, there's good stuff there, but her method of getting there is not very great. And her striking game, both offensively and defensively, is, I can't quite say remedial, but is certainly not sophisticated. And Zlezniakova was just able to force her to fight on the feet for the vast majority of the fight, and that's just not where she's going to find success. Claudia Seguya defeated Arina Alexeva via unanimous decision, 30-27s across the board. Not a whole lot to say here. Not a good fight. Tiger Ulanbekov defeated Azat Maksum via unanimous decision, 230-27s and a 29-28. The first 2 rounds were close. Because they're close, I'm not up in arms over 30-27. But you could have given Maksum at least one of those rounds. He fought very well. This was a good little fight. Not great, but definitely a good little fight. And kicking everything off, a terrible fight. Muhammad Usman defeated Hamdi Abdelwahab via unanimous decision, 29-28. Fight sucked. Don't know what else to tell you. Did I put that on my list? I'm going to do so right now, actually, if I did not. I put Blades and Kuniev. Boy, that one deserved it too, but Hamdi Abdelwahab versus Hamid Usman. Yeah, that's on my list of worst fight of the year possibilities. Jeez. So, I have to bring something up here before we move on from this card. We didn't get a finish until the Sadikov and Mata fight. Now, I am not one of these people who stands up here and says, a lack of a finish, fights that go the distance are bad, are boring, or even that it's a reliable indicator of that. It's not. In fact, if you look at the best fights in MMA history, most of them go the distance. So not an indicator of overall quality, but if you just want to bear with me for half a second here. This card only having 2 finishes, a little rough, especially when a few of the fights were not great. Some of the fights that did go the distance I thought were perfectly fine, good fights. Ulanbekov and Moxham I thought was a good fight. Coe and Elliott I thought a little bit one-sided, so it's not like a great fight, but not a boring fight, certainly. Even Zleznyakova and Mullins, it was sloppy and I didn't find very interesting, but it wasn't lacking in action. Some of these others were, but I'm just making a point that I'm about to read off a statistic. And I'm not saying that everything that happens during the stretch that I'm going to talk about here is bad. But this is sort of making a general point. If we look at all the UFC fights chronologically, we went 15 fights between legitimate finishes. If we start, so Sadikov and Moto, we're going to count backwards from there to the last legitimate finish, okay? So, Naimov and Grad, Coe and Elliott, Park and Narudiev, Darya and Mullins, Seguya and Alexeva, Ulanbekov and Moxham, Muhammad Usman and Hamdi Abdelwahab. So 7 fights on this card. Guess what? Now we're going to go back to last week. The Buckley and Usman card was still counting backwards, so Usman and Buckley, Namajunas and Maverick, Shabazian and Petrosky, we've now reached 10. Barcelos and Garbrandt, 11. Abdul Malik and Brundage, 12. That was a technical decision, but not a finish. Alonzo Menafield and Umar C is 13. Craig and Bellato, not a legitimate finish, 14. Chiesa and McGee, 15. Then we get to Malcolm Wellmaker and Chris Moutinho, so 16 technically fights between, so 15 fights between finishes. Now look, once again, man, I am not here to pretend that every fight between those 2 points is bad. Not at all. Barcelos and Garbrandt was not a bad fight. Namajunas and Maverick wasn't great, but I don't think it was bad. I don't think Buckman and Usli was a bad fight. Getting fight of the night I thought was bogus, but that's neither here nor there. And as I mentioned, like everything that I listed off, that happened before Sadikov and Mata was not bad. Coe and Elliott was not a bad fight. In fact, I think the only, I would argue, objectively bad fight in that stretch, well, no, if I go back to the other one, point being, it's just draining. It's really draining to watch that many fights go the distance, especially when most of them are just kind of ho-hum. And some of them are outright bad. The UFC's product is just super watered down at this point. And I know there's a segment of fans that get bitter when people bring that up, but if 15 fights between finishes is a whole card, and then some. I think the average UFC event is still 12. It might be leaning more 13 at this point if you want to round. Right? 15 fights in a row is an entire event. An entire event's worth of fights consecutively between finishes. I am not here to say that every fight that happened during that stretch was bad, once again, but man, is that telling. It's super telling. So that was the UFC's debut in Azerbaijan, because they don't mind allying with or taking money from, governments that have participated in ethnic cleansing, and I'm only going to say it the one time because I don't want to I said it once about the Saudis when the UFC got in bed with them, and when WWE did it, I said the same thing once. Gonna say it. The Azerbaijani government is, borderline. There are elections, but they're a little bit dubious. I mean, the same guy's been in power since like 2003. So yeah. And the status of their free press is that it's not free. And they did the ethnic cleansing of the Armenians from an area of their country, and I get that that's a little. What do I say? Ethnic cleansing is complicated. I get that the border dispute there is a complicated geopolitical issue. The, cleansing again, some of that was like, death. Some of it was just forced relocation, which is not good either. Uh, Point being, at the end of all that, like, I acknowledge that the history there is a little bit complicated, even if I say that, ethnic cleansing is not a complicated response. It's not a good thing. It's, in fact, a very, very evil thing. But so I've said it once because that's who they took a bunch of money from to bring the event here, and I'm not going to bring it up again because A, nobody cares, and B, I don't want to harp on it all the time. So I said it for the record, and I said it to kind of clear my conscience, but I'm not under any illusion that, my podcast is going to change anyone's perspective on this. So I already mentioned it, but your fight of the night was Sadikov and Mata. Completely deserved. Look that fight up if you... There's only one fight from this card you look up. Look that one up. Performances, they gave one to Sadikov and one to Mata. I have to imagine that because Oralbai and Masayev both kind of went, yeah, we're not going to make 155, that there was some... Even though it officially turned into a catchweight, the UFC doesn't like doing that, so I feel like there was some backstage moratorium on giving them a bonus. Because otherwise Oralbai could have gotten one. Yeah, just a rough night, man. Not everything was bad, but it was long. It was a long event. So that's where we are with that. Yeah, full report, MMAZona411mania.com. Go give it a read if you're so inclined. I always appreciate it. So thank you for that. My mouse is kind of dying on me, and I'm not happy about having to potentially replace that at this juncture. I was hoping to get another handful of months out of it, but the last one I bought was not sturdy enough for my use. And it's sort of wearing down faster than usual. I need to just be willing to spend the extra money necessary for that. Okay, so moving on. There was a big piece of news that came out of UFC on ABC 8. I will talk about it when I get to the news section instead of chronologically, so just kind of bear with me on that. All right, UFC 317 coming your way this Saturday from the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada. 2 title fights, that's good. We have a theoretical number 1 contenders fight / backup fight for the co-main event. We've just got a pretty good card here overall. It drops off a little bit once we get out of the main card. In fact, even some of the main card is like dubious pay-per-view stuff. Like, man, I'm looking at those prelims now, and I'm kind of going, yeesh. We have Cedricus Dumas on this card. That guy just got arrested again. Look, I try real hard not to be like the moral police around here. I really do. But the man escaped custody not that long ago and was rearrested. And we're just giving him another fight? You're churning out a comical amount of fighters onto your roster. You're telling me you can't decide that guy's too much of a headache? Ugh. I'll yell about it later if I suppose if I feel like it. All right, moving on from that. Yeah, we were supposed to have Paulo Costa and Roman Kopylov here. That fell apart. I got moved to UFC 318. I imagine something to do with Costa, because that dude has almost as many canceled and rescheduled fights as he has had actual fights in the UFC. Justin Tafa pulled out of a fight with Janata Janiz. The Tafa brothers are just kind of there. Is there anything else? Yeah, we were supposed to get Brandon Royval and Manel Kopp. Kopp broke a toe or part of his foot. This one depends on whether you want to count that part of the metatarsal as foot or toe. But so he's been replaced by Joshua Van. Yeah, look, it's an okay card. I am not trying to crap on it entirely. The top two fights are real good. In fact, the top four are really, really solid pay-per-view fights. It just kind of drops off after that. I'll see if I can find something interesting to talk about beyond it, but, it just kind of is what it is about that. Anyway, main event for the vacant lightweight title, Ilia Topuria, former featherweight champion, and Charles Oliveira, former lightweight champion. This is a good fight. It's a really good fight. I can see an argument for this going either way. The odds are fairly heavily with Topuria. I wouldn't be comfortable having to pay out like plus 300 on Oliveira here. But I'm going with Topuria. Here's why. There's a few reasons. One, we've seen him fight at lightweight before, so we know his power does carry up there. And that's a big thing. And look, Ilia Topuria's power is real good, but the important part about his power is the delivery system, which is excellent. I don't think Ilia Topuria is the hardest puncher in the world, or in his weight class. Even at featherweight, I don't think he was the hardest puncher. But his delivery of the power was so good that exacerbates it, right? You can be the hardest puncher in the world, but if you can't land, you may as well be the softest puncher in the world. There's no difference between having godlike power and no power if you can't hit anything. Topuria's delivery system is superb. So I think that's a big thing in his favor. Now, Oliveira's defense, especially early, is also a little iffy. He's been able to rally from having some rough moments in the past, but needs to be said, been a little bit iffy. A couple of things about this. Oliveira has a willingness to play guard that it's going to get him in trouble in places. It might get him in trouble here. He's kind of used to being able to, if I get hit, nobody wants to go into my guard. Because he has a good guard for MMA. I don't mean to say otherwise, but that's just, there's a lot of guys who really don't want to even play in there. And the reality is, if you are smart about being in his guard, you can do a lot of damage. That's where Paul Felder really messed him up and stopped him. Granted, Felder had to overcome some tight choke attacks, but Topuria is also a really good grappler in his own right, so he's not going to be scared. Be respectful, but don't be scared. So I don't know how that's going to play. Oliveira's striking style is also very upright. It's a very Muay Thai style stance and whatnot. He is very... And look, there's pros and cons to all of this. This is not like somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, fighting with straight knees and an upright posture with their chin up. You can fight more upright as a deliberate stylistic choice because it does carry some advantages. And that's where he is most comfortable fighting out of. that works well against a lot of things. It is not great against somebody who does the boxing of Ilia Topuria. In fact, if you want an older school example of how some of this might match up, there was a Dutch kickboxer, Ramon Dekker, the Diamond. He went to Thailand from Holland, and he tore a lot of the Thai fighters up because he actually knew how to box in addition to the kicking. And he would get into the pocket, bordering on the clinch, and he had these really fast hands and good boxing combinations that they were just not ready for. Because not a lot of people were doing that if you had the other Thai, if you had a lot of like traditional Thai style. And he cleaned up for a while. I mean, it wasn't perfect, no one was, but there was a when you watch some of those old fights of his, you can see that the guys he's fighting are just not used to actual boxing, especially in certain ranges. Might be a bit of a similar thing at play here, just from like styles and stances on the feet. Um, Look, Oliveira's late push to get to the title was really impressive, but he's also 35 at this point. And I mean, he's been in the UFC forever. I mean, his UFC debut was back in 2010. So, August of 10. Like, he's been here for, we're getting closing in on 15 years. He's amassed a bunch of accolades. And his run, like, after that loss to Felder, his run up to the belt and then his was a very, very, very impressive. Like, he did some really good work during that stretch. Um, Even after losing it, like, he rebounded by beating Beneil Dariush. He had a close fight with Arman Tsarukyan. He's still one of the better guys, but I do think we're starting to reach the point when years and miles start to catch up to fighters as a general rule. And I think very highly of Topuria in general. He's going to have to be mindful of the leg kicks. And the other potential fault point here, sort of, Oliveira is a very aggressive fighter. If you can actually get him to back up, it actually neuters a chunk of his game, or if it doesn't neuter it, it alters it substantially. So if Topuria can get that going, that'll be in his favor. But I think he's going to have to deal with being on the back foot for a little bit. And Topuria doesn't spend a lot of time on the back foot. He did some more when he fought Max. He did a lot more. There was a lot more like equitable movement and momentum there. So he's gonna. I think he's going to try and get that kind of a motion momentum relationship going with Oliveira. We'll see if it works. Again, I'm speculating here. But if he has to fight a lot of that on the back foot, Topuria, that is a way that Oliveira could find success. Because neither of these guys have demonstrated a lot of like excellence fighting off the back foot, or so remains to be seen. I'm comfortable going with Topuria, but the odds are wide enough that I would not be comfortable holding. I wouldn't be comfortable holding them personally. But that's a really good fight. I expect to get more excited about that fight as I get closer to it. So good on that. Big thumbs up there. Very much looking forward to it. Co-main event for the flyweight championship, Alexandre Pantoja, the most disrespected champion in the UFC. Look, man, he is only ranked number 10 pound for pound. That's comical. That is just comical. Look, I respect Jack Della Maddalena and, Magomed Ankalaev and Dricus du Plessis. But if we're just talking about pound for pound and what that means, he should be ahead of them. He should definitely be ahead of Pereira, and Ankalaev shouldn't even be 6. JDM probably shouldn't be 8. But pound for pound is a whole other discussion. I'm not going to get lost in it, but except to say that I definitely think Pantoja is perpetually overlooked. He's defending the belt against Kai Kara-France, who is 32, and gets this title shot off the back of one win when he beat Steve Urseg. It was a good win, but look, at flyweight right now, I need a serious reason to pick against Alexandre Pantoja. He has hit the 35 mark, though. And against a different opponent, I might be more inclined to think that Pantoja is going to lose here. But Kai Kara-France he's very quick. He's got pretty good power, but Pantoja is just real good. Yeah, the odds are with Pantoja. The odds in this one are a lot more fair, I think. It's about minus 260 for Pantoja. That strikes me as fair. So I'm going with Pantoja. He's real good. But that's, they're just trying to keep flyweight moving. Yeah, so like the fight. Next up, we have flyweight. And I imagine one of these two is like unofficially the backup for if something happens to Kai Kara-France in particular. But Brandon Royval was supposed to fight Manel Kape. I was really looking forward to that fight. Instead, in steps Joshua Van on short notice because Van fought just like 3 weeks ago. So I like Van. I really do. I like his upside. I love his body work. There's a lot good there. This just feels like too much, too soon. Pardon me. Brandon Royval has fought for the belt before. Royval's only losses in the UFC are to Brandon Moreno and Alexandre Pantoja. He's coming off of 2 split decision wins, one against Moreno, which probably shouldn't have been split, and one against Tyra, which I definitely think shouldn't have been split. That was a pretty clear 3-2 for Royval, but that was a good fight, too. So, not complaining too much. I would have favored Kape to beat Royval. Not by a huge amount, but a little bit. Enough to pick him. I'm not going to sleep on Joshua Van here. It is not at all outside the realm of possibility for him to win. Some places have this basically as a pick'em. But Royval's fought the better guys. Royval's beat the better guys. Royval is a little bit more well-rounded. The question is just like, how does that line up with some of Van's being a bit more specialist in terms of the boxing in particular? So there's definitely ways for Joshua Van to win this fight. I will not be surprised a little bit if he does. But I'm picking Royval. He's the more proven commodity. Next up at lightweight, this is a pretty good fight actually. Beneil Dariush and Renato Moicano. So Beneil Dariush, bless him, 2-fight losing streak, losses to Charles Oliveira and Arman Saryuki, and he's been finished in both of them. Before the Oliveira loss, he had a really good winning streak going. Thiago Moises, Drew Dober, Frank Camacho, Drakkar Klose, Scott Holtzman, Carlos Diego Ferreira, Tony Ferguson, and Mateusz Gamrot. So really good winning streak going there. But he's a little bit up against it. Moicano's coming off of that loss to Makhachev for the title that he took on really short notice. I like this fight. This is a really solid little lightweight fight here. Moicano at lightweight has a fairly specific game that he employs. I don't mean that as a negative, just as a bit of a statement. A lot of his game in this weight class revolves around being able to clinch up, get takedowns, and do some groundwork from top position. And I don't know that he's going to be able to force that against Dariush. Dariush has out-wrestled some very, very talented grapplers. Moicano is the favorite a little bit, I can understand, and Dariush may be ready to hit the downhill portion of his career. I'm going to pick Dariush, though. I don't want to just pick favorites, and I think there's a real case to be made for Dariush here. So I'm going to lean towards Dariush just a little bit. But that's a good little fight. Bantamweight next, Peyton Talbot and Felipe Lima. So Talbot coming off of a really bad loss in a lot of respects to Rony Barcelos. Just a bit too much too soon for him. It's not like Talbot had no moments in the Barcelos fight, but he went from, a couple of guys whose UFC status is becoming a little bit shaky to a very disciplined, proven veteran like Barcelos, and he just came up a little bit short. Unfortunately for him, he's fighting Felipe Lima. And here's the thing about Lima. He's good. He's 14-1, 14-fight winning streak, 2-0 in the UFC, wins over Muhammad Naimov, which was really impressive, and Miles Johns. I am just more comfortable picking Lima. I actually think he's the more proven fighter. Talbot has a lot of upside. I'm certainly not. I am not ready to just throw him under the bus with one loss to a guy as good overall as Barcelos, but Felipe Lima is the opposite of a sort of softer landing get well fight after that loss. He's a guy who's fairly unheralded, but is really good. So I'm going with Lima. Odds are a little bit with Lima. Fair enough there. That's your main card. Top 4, definitely pay-per-view worthy, I think. Talbot and Lima, something had to fill in for Costa and Kopylov falling out, is kind of my read on that. On the prelims, Jack Hermansson and Gregory Rodriguez. So Jack Hermansson, mythical beast, Jack Hermansson, who shows up once every year or so, sometimes once every 2 years. Coming off a win over Joe Pyfer, that was February of last year, so over a year out. He lost to Roman Dolidze before that. That was a weird loss. He beat Chris Curtis before that. Had the split decision loss to Sean Strickland before that. That really shouldn't have been split. I thought Strickland had that fairly handily. Anyway, and RoboCop, Gregory Rodriguez, lost to Jared Cannonier his last time out. His first 5-round fight, and he fought well for a round and a half, but then he hurt Cannonier early too and kind of just punched himself out going for it. But I still think fairly highly of him. The problem is Hermansson moves a lot and moves very well. The thing is, you just don't have much of a read on Hermansson because he doesn't fight often enough to let you get a real read on him. I'm tempted to pick Hermansson here. He's the underdog. And look, I like Gregory Rodriguez. Which of these two guys do I like watching more? I actually kind of prefer to watch Rodriguez. But I got to be honest about kind of how I see this. And RoboCop's not quite fleet enough of foot. And Hermansson does a lot of moving. He's going to get hit. It's one of those weird ones where, I want to talk myself into Rodriguez. I really do. And Hermansson is 37. I mean, Rodriguez is not exactly a spring chicken. He's 33. He's got old man face, though. I can just really easily see this being 3 rounds of Rodriguez never being able to, corral and attack Hermansson. Or Rodriguez, excuse me. And Hermansson's kind of outpointing him. Let me asterisk this one. I'm going with Hermansson. I talked myself into it. But I need to rewatch his last couple of fights. I'm going on memory, and there might be something more specific about how Rodriguez moves that changes my mind. I need to rewatch a couple of their last fights for both of them, so let me asterisk that. But honestly, I am feeling a little bit more Rodriguez here. Or excuse me, Hermanson. Featherweight next, Haider Emil and Jose Miguel Delgado. Let's see, Emil, undefeated, 11-0. 3-0 in the UFC, coming off a split decision win over William Gomez that... Oh, how did I score that? I don't remember. I think I scored that for Gomez because Emil threw a lot but hit a lot of nothing. One of those where like perceived activity kind of won him the day, I think. And Delgado, look at you, sir. I believe this is his UFC debut. See, 9-1, 6-fight winning streak. No, he's got a UFC debut. Oh, he beat Conor Matthews. Right. He's a little bit washed. Okay. This still kind of feels like like they're setting up Emil a little bit. Odds are with Delgado, actually. A lot of people saw a lot of what I saw, I guess, in the last Emil fight. Yeah, let me go with Delgado. I will trust the odds on that one to still be accurate. Okay, moving on. Women's flyweight, Tracy Cortez and Viviane Araújo. So, Araújo coming off a win over Karine Silva. That was a pretty good win. Lost to Natalia Silva before that. No shame there. Natalia Silva's doing some good work. Beat Jennifer Maia. Lost to Amanda Ribas. Lost to Alexa Grasso. Araújo's kind of just who she is at this point. And Cortez, coming off of a loss in the main event to Rose Namajunas. She didn't fight badly in that. I mean, she lost clearly, but she didn't fight badly. That snapped that's up to an 11-fight winning streak for her. She struggled with activity. Only fought, so she was active in 19, but only fought once in 2020, once in 2021, once in 2022, once in 2023, once in 2024, and we're almost a year off again. The odds are with Cortez. I think I'm still going to respect that because she's kind of generally done better work than Araújo, and Araújo has not really evolved as a fighter all that much recently. But the wheels are going to fall off of Tracy Cortez at some point, especially with that level of activity, and it's going to be pretty sudden when it happens, I think. Lightweight next, Terrence McKinney and Vyacheslav Borshov. Terrence McKinney is a one-round killer, but after that it gets real rough for him. He beat Damir Hadzovic back in February, but he got head kicked by Esteban Ribovics in 37 seconds before that. He's got... look, McKinney's a fun enough fighter. I'm certainly not trying to dog on him here. And good old Slava Claus. Borsho is 8-5-1. Coming off a loss to Tom Nolan. He had a split decision win over Hamas Yontop before that. Slightly dubious there. Golly, I do not know about... Here's the thing. Slava Claus can get hit and hurt. If he gets to recover from that, he'll give McKinney all kinds of problems. But McKinney also does a lot of good work when he gets somebody hurt. I'm going to lean towards McKinney. I don't feel comfortable doing that because McKinney is pretty uneven. Next up, we have Cedricus Dumas and Jason McVeigh. Good grief, who could possibly care? And again, Dumas should not be in the UFC at this point for any number of reasons. Dumas is 10-3, 3-3 in the UFC, coming off a loss to Michal Oleksiejczuk. And, fresh off escaping from custody again, I guess. Jason McVeigh, 6-0. Okay. This is his UFC debut. Has he beaten anyone I recognize? I don't think so. He's got a lot of first-round finishes. In fact, all of his professional fights are. That always makes me nervous. Because respectfully, if that's all you're used to doing, when you run up against legitimate opposition that can handle what you do, you fall apart. I don't think Dumas is the guy who's gonna seriously challenge him on that. So I'm gonna go with McVeigh, but I don't know. I wouldn't bet on that fight. At heavyweight next, we have Gennady Janiz and Alvin Hines. So again, Janiz was supposed to fight Justin Tafa. Instead, Hines steps in on short notice. Hines is 7-0, so that's not nothing. Had a good run through the LFA. And, it's heavyweight. So you don't actually have to be all that good to have a lot of success these days. Janiz is just kind of a tough out for a lot of reasons. He's 8-1. Coming off of the loss to Marcin Tybura, there was a doctor stoppage, deservedly so. Tybura got him down and messed him up. I think he'll probably rebound okay here. Tafa might have been a better stylistic matchup for him because Tafa will just swing with you. Whereas Hines is probably going to fight a little bit smarter. Still going to go with Janiz here. But, crappy heavyweights. And kicking everything off, we have Nico Price and Jacoby Smith. So, Price, Florida man. That's because he's from Florida, but kind of Florida man is a meme. 1-3 in his last 4. Coming off a loss to Temba Gorimbo. He's a little bit washed. Not trying to be cruel about that. Then Smith is 10-0. Had a decent enough UFC debut when he beat Preston Parsons. I don't have much of a problem picking him here. Oh, good grief, he is a comical favorite almost. Look, it's MMA. I don't feel comfortable with anybody being minus 2,000, but that's where Smith is, so. And that's the card. UFC 317. I will have you covered Saturday in the MMA Zone of 411mania.com. Y'all know where to find me. Should be a pretty good time over there. Alrighty. We're going for a little bit, but we have to talk about Jon Jones. So, at the post-fight press conference for UFC on ABC 8, the Baku card, Dana White says, yeah, I talked with Jon Jones. He said he's retiring. So Tom Aspinall is now officially the undisputed heavyweight champion of the UFC. And we're just moving forward with this, which is an entirely predictable, entirely foreseeable thing. I don't know why they were dragging this out. It got to the point where you were getting pseudo-conspiracy theories. So, I've reduced a lot of my MMA media consumption for, I think, understandable reasons. There's still a few guys that I make sure to check in on, but I've lost kind of the time in my life and the time of day where I can just be like, you know what? I will devote 2 hours to the 3 hours to the Ariel Helwani show or stuff like that. So I let highlights kind of suffice, and if there's something specific I want to look up, I'll look it up after the fact. But because they amuse me, I still watch every week pretty much Morning Combat. I'll just say it every week. I've been watching those guys since, the inception of their show. I liked both of them before that. I don't interact with the community that they've built because I don't do that almost with anything, even if I'm a fan of it, but that's because I'm me. But you had a few different people. Brian Campbell was not the only one, but I saw him do it first, and then other people I saw bring it up. It got to the point where there were a lot of people going, and including some respectable media members, who were starting to speculate that, you know what, maybe Jon is just taking a bunch of abuse, and they are sitting on announcing him versus Tom Aspinall until they get their new TV deal sorted out. because they don't want to come out and say where it's going to be necessarily early, and they don't want to admit if it might not come out and might not happen before signing a new deal that they're trying to get $1 billion for. Because $1 billion a year. Because, yeah, admitting that you lost one of the only actual draws you have left would be a bad thing for that. So you started to get some of the, like, again, pseudo-conspiracy theorist stuff going on there, and not even necessarily for nothing. But that's just kind of where we'd gotten to with the talking points on this. And then, Jon, it's confirmed now. Dude, Jon's been saying it for a while that he's kind of done. And for some reason, just no one believed him. And look, I'm not saying Jon Jones has, like, you want to question the credibility of Jon Jones' public statements, that's fine. Certainly even healthy and understandable. But it kind of just got to the point where, like, we were doing the same thing, same song and dance with Conor. They did the same song and dance with Khabib. When Khabib was like, no, I'm done. I'm retired. Bye-bye. Respectfully, no. Thank you, but no. And Dane was like, yeah, well, we're going to talk with Khabib and figure... And he spent like a couple of months doing that with Khabib. Then Khabib was fairly unequivocal in any statement he made, and we just were doing this song and dance, I guess. I don't know. So, I got to talk about Jon first, then we'll talk about the rest of this. Okay. So, let me just start with this as well, by the way. The fact that, like, that news dropped, and then a couple of hours later, everyone kind of went... news broke that, like, Jon now has more legal trouble related to an incident, like leaving the scene of an accident in New Mexico again. If you'll recall, that was a thing he's done in the past, and I say he's done because he kind of pled out to that, which is an admission of guilt. You couldn't script it, man. You couldn't script Jon Jones retires, and then literally, like, the next thing you could find on a social media feed was Jon Jones in legal trouble again. I don't know. I'm not going to bring that up too much because some of it I'm going to talk about because it just kind of becomes necessary, but I'm not going to harp on it. All right, so where does this leave us? Talking about Jon Jones, Grabaka hitman Kaposa had a very, very salient point that he made on Twitter. It shouldn't be possible to move up a weight class, win a title, and have that tarnish your legacy. But Jon Jones is a special fighter. And darn if that's not true. Look, there's a bunch of people who, because they don't like Jon, and I'm not saying you have to, I don't know him anything up, never met the man. Even in a professional capacity, never met him. Based on a lot of the stuff around him, I have to kind of question whether or not he's a good person, but I'm not here to talk about whether or not he's a good person. But because there's that, a lot of people, and because of how he's handled the heavyweight portion of his career, as abbreviated as it was, the number of people who are trying to, in a revisionist way, go, how could you possibly consider this man one of the all-time greats? His entire resume is beating up old washed pride guys. I can't have that. Look, you don't want to be a fan of Jon? Fine. Not here to advocate for him as a human being. Not here to even say how you should feel about him as a fighter. Support who you want to support for whatever reason you want to support them. I don't care. We are not going to do ahistorical revisionist BS because you don't like him. I'm going to stick up for the guy's career here only in the cage. Jon Jones is the best light heavyweight this sport has ever produced by a mile. There is not a close second. Daniel Cormier was not close. I don't even know where you'd go, really. You can make an argument for Shogun, his career at light heavyweight as the second best. I know his UFC run was a little bit awkward, but if you didn't watch his run through Pride, you missed out big time. Go look that up, man. Shogun was great. Even when he got to the UFC, he wasn't bad. He became champion, legitimately. Oh no, but he was washed. He was the champion. He wasn't washed, he was the champion. Ugh. And then, like, oh no, Lyoto Machida was a middleweight, or Rashad Evans was a middleweight. They were both former light heavyweight champions. Stop with this nonsense. Seriously, stop it. His run at light heavyweight is one of the most impressive things I've ever seen in this sport. Now, you want to say that the way he conducted himself as a heavyweight and the heavyweight champion diminishes his overall legacy? Okay, that's a very reasonable position to hold. But if I'm just talking about his light heavyweight reign, and for the moment that's all I'm talking about, he is the best this sport has ever produced, and it's not close. Only one loss on his record. Most wins in championship fights in UFC history. Longest light heavyweight title reign, again by a large margin. Turned in some truly remarkable performances along the way. Now, okay, so but what about the drug test failures? Guys, I gotta tell you, I don't care. You really want to look back at MMA, especially like more dark era or for long stretches of it, and pretend that those guys were clean? I was a big fan of Pride. A lot of people were. You want to try and lionize Pride and then want to stand on the ground of drug testing issues? They didn't drug test in Pride. It was kind of a selling point. I'm just, I'm not going to play that. I don't care about that almost as much as anybody else. Because I accept that 90% of fighters are juicing. They're on something. That just is what it is. And to everyone who wants to talk about his character outside of the ring being a factor in this, okay, hope you don't rate Mike Tyson or Kobe Bryant or Babe Ruth either. It's such a weird thing when you decide that this is how we're going to go about factoring some of this stuff. If you want to limit people that you like deeply support or want to enter into these conversations as guys who have never been on any kind of performance enhancing substance and are like of high moral character outside of the cage, you can count those number of guys on one hand in the history of MMA. And frequently it won't be who you think it is. So again, most of them, there's a lot of, again, drug issues. And then, oh, their character. You don't know these guys. You really don't know them. Please, let's just stop. So, if I want to say that, Kobe Bryant's one of the best basketball players of all time, well, he was more credibly accused of sexual assault than Mike Tyson was. Tyson just went to jail for it, and Kobe Bryant, got off. But again, if you actually look at the evidence in both of those cases, the evidence was much more damning against Kobe Bryant than it was against Tyson. And they're just, again, man, it's one of the reasons I throw most of that crap out the window, because if I start trying to consider all that stuff, it's just, it's too much of a headache for me when I just want to talk about in-cage stuff. Now, Jon Jones as the heavyweight champion has been a farce. He deserves blame for that. The UFC deserves a ton of blame for that. Look, the UFC messed around with Francis and Jon. And some of that was a little bit on Jon. Some of that was on the UFC and their relationship with Francis. We never got it. Jon wins the belt. And then the first defense is against a guy who hasn't won a fight in like 2 years at that point. Might have been 3 because he hadn't won since 2020. Then Jon gets an injury, and they just rebook the fight for a literal year later. And it's 41-year-old, like, decrepit Stipe Miocic, who, look, I respect Stipe's career. I really do. He is the most accomplished heavyweight champion in UFC history. That is certainly something to be respected. But at that point, he was more than done, and we drug that whole thing out a literal year longer than necessary for a vanity win for Jon Jones and to give Stipe Miocic broken ribs and internal damage. Oh boy, that was sure worth it. While Tom Aspinall is right there. And again, the UFC drug all that out. Man, last couple of times you've had a champion not interested in fighting the number one contender, you were quick to strip them of titles. I remember what you did to Jermaine Durandamy. Hey, most of us actually approved of it. I remember how quickly you guys decided you weren't going to mess around with Nico Montano because she failed to make weight once. And look, again, I get it. She's a weight class champion, and if you're hospitalized trying to make 125 and you cause a fight to fall through with, the next contender, I get it. We all understood when the UFC did it. For some reason, they decided to drag this out with Jon Jones. Jon Jones deciding that, this is how I'm going to conduct myself, and it's a mess. It's a disaster. Ugh. It is an unfortunate stain on Jon's legacy. It really is. And again, there's a lot of people who, because they don't like Jon, don't want to have the conversation about just in the cage where he ranks all time. If we're just talking bell to bell, he is one of the very best fighters I've ever seen. You can make the argument he's the best. Now, it gets a little bit fuzzy at the top of that list between, Jon and George St. Pierre and Jose Aldo and Demetrius Johnson, and a lot of those guys you kind of try to sort out that way. But you can put Jon at the top of that list, and I don't think it's wrong. And I know a lot of guys go, but the drug test failures. You better disqualify Anderson Silva then too, just off the bat. And you better discount anything before the UFC was doing USADA testing, and even under USADA testing. And I get that Jon's a headache for the UFC in some respects. I get that he's been a headache for fans. As a fan who has watched literally his entire UFC career and covered the vast majority of it, I remember his UFC debut, by the way. He was not really expected to beat Andre Gusmão, and he did. I remember the reaction to him suplexing Stephan Bonner all over the place. It was... The reaction that got out of Joe Silva, who was sitting cage side, was memed a little bit, but also like legendary in some respects. And the fact that he ended his career the way he did is, I'm not going to do revisionism on it. I don't like it, but I'm not going to pretend that his entire run is something you can just like be disingenuously critical of. It's ridiculous, and I don't have time for it. Because you can do that with anyone. I could do that to George St. Pierre. In fact, I've seen people do it to George St. Pierre. Oh, George is higher on the GOAT list because he never ducked anyone. Yeah, he kind of did refuse to fight Johnny Hendricks in a rematch of a fight that a lot of people thought he lost. I scored it for him, but only barely, and not a hill I'm going to die on. And he, actively didn't accept fights with Anderson Silva when that was the super fight most of us wanted. Look, he managed his career. And I'm not going to say that Jon wasn't the fact that Tom Aspinall is as good as he is was definitely a factor for Jon. But I don't think it was the only factor. I think he's also been doing this for a really long time. And that's look, I wanted to see him fight Francis. I wanted to see him fight Tom Aspinall. I really did. But, you can't force the guy. If he wants to be done, fine. God bless. I hope he gets his life together. Sincerely, I hope everyone does. But I'm not going to pretend that he was not one of the very, very best this sport has ever produced, bell to bell in the cage. He was. Easily. Easily. And if we're just talking about his light heavyweight run, I'm not kidding when I say the best by a wide margin. Does not have a close second. So, but the way this whole thing went down and the fact that he did have so many like headaches that he caused, yeah, there's stuff you need to talk about. I'm not saying don't. I'm just saying when I talk about his legacy, I'm limiting him and a lot of other guys like him. I limit it to what they do bell to bell or on the court or on the field, however you want to phrase it like that. That's kind of my limiting factor. Because if I do too much of the other stuff, it gets real ugly. Was the wrong word. It gets real messy. Trying to parse out a lot of that other stuff. So I choose not to as a general rule. But yeah, Jon back in legal trouble, so there's also that, to the shock of no one. Um, yeah. So that brings us to the state of the heavyweight division. What a disaster. You have the best heavyweight one of the best like younger heavyweights that you've had in a really long time in Tom Aspinall. And you just sat him on the sidelines for a year because we're screwing around with the Jon Jones thing. Ugh. Ugh. Frankly, I'm kind of surprised the UFC didn't wait the 90 days or so it would have taken for Jon to overtake Cain Velasquez as longest reigning heavyweight champion in UFC history. They could have just waited that one out. And realistically, who would have been surprised by that? Ugh. Yeah, look, man, you want to say Jon's heavyweight title reign is like comically poor? I can't quite get to fraudulent. The win over Stipe, yes. That was a joke of a fight. It was a waste of everyone's time. So that one, yes, but his title win was perfectly legitimate. It was against a guy who had a really close fight with the former champion that the UFC couldn't keep under contract because, heaven forbid, the champion advocate for himself. Ugh, more on that in a minute. But Jon's title win was perfectly valid. The fact that he then didn't fight Tom Aspinall and had a vanity fight with the corpse of Stipe Miocic, yeah, that sucked. And then I can't only blame him for how this plays, though. The UFC is like the only force in the world of MMA. If they wanted this, they could have made a bigger deal about it, and they made their choices related to it as well. And they bear a giant chunk of blame. TKO doesn't care that much. They kind of have the UFC on autopilot. Dana White's mostly checked out. And consequently, we get what we've been getting. And it's not good. A lot of it is not good. So, yeah, but the heavyweight division, I need a minute here. Because it's bad. Heavyweight combat sports globally is not good right now. MMA, it's real bad. Somebody mentioned this, but there was a thing about like collegiate sports recently. There's more like I think it's NIL money for collegiate athletes, and a lot of wrestlers make enough money off of stuff like that to not have to then go fight for 12 and 12 for 6 fights in the UFC. The pipeline of collegiate wrestlers to MMA has been, I can't quite say cut. Fully cut would be a bit of an exaggeration, but severely, severely reduced at a minimum. Severely reduced. And that's hurt heavyweight. And yeah, just to sort of complement that point, Dana White was asked about bringing Francis Ngannou back. You see, last week or so, I talked a little bit about this. Eric Nixick, Francis's head coach, gave an interview where he said Francis was potentially open to returning to the UFC, which I don't really have a problem believing. Dana was asked about it and did I'm not a fan of Francis Ngannou, so no, that seems very, very unlikely. Oy. Guy, I don't care. I don't care who Dana White is a fan of. I could not possibly care less about who gives him a headache doing business with. You're about to promote a boxing fight where, like, Canelo's guaranteed $250 million, and Crawford's guaranteed $100 million. Like, guy, I get that Saudi's footing a lot of that bill, but MMA fighters, look at that. Look at what the president of the UFC is doing and involved in and willing to help pay out, and look at what you're making. The UFC is asking for $1 billion a year. They're going to try and get it like in aggregate across all their different broadcast partners because it's looking more and more like that's going to be a fractured deal instead of a singular one. But that's what they're looking for. And what do you guys get paid? Eh? Think about that. But no, here we are again. And Dana White's petty bitterness at Francis Ngannou is stopping him from potentially bringing him back. My man, I don't care if you're a fan, you need him. You want to have a look at the heavyweight division? Let's have a look at the heavyweight division, shall we? This will be just depressing. So, Tom Aspinall is now the full champion. The next top of your division goes as... I'm just going to read the next 15 guys. Let's have some fun. Cyril Gane, Alexander Volkov, Sergey Pavlovich. Okay. Gane is iffy. He's done a couple of movies, done like the movie for Netflix thing. No one's quite sure where he is. Volkov, improved. Probably should have beat Gane the last time they fought. Pavlovich, good power. Nice long reach, but again, we've seen maybe some of the limits of him. Curtis Blades, I think we've seen his ceiling for sure. Jailton Almeida, kind of a one-trick pony. Waldo Cortez Acosta, who's should not have won his last fight. Kind of a sign that his success at heavyweight is an indictment on the division. Marcin Tybura at age has been around forever. Sergey Spivak at 9, who should have beat Waldo Cortez Acosta, but Derek Lewis at 10, and Derek Lewis is Derek Lewis. Number 11 is Tai Tuivasa, who's on like a 3-fight losing streak, hasn't won a fight since the year of the flood, and is ballooned up to like 350 pounds. That's your number 11 guy. From there, it's Shamil Gaziev, Mick Parkin, Taliesin Teixeira, and Martin Bidet. You want to sit there with a straight face and tell me that you are depriving the fans of one of the best heavyweight fighters this sport has to offer because because he makes you have to do your job. Because you have to do some financial negotiating with him. I'm supposed to care one iota about your headaches related to this. I want the best fights. That means I want you to have the best fighters. That means at heavyweight, Francis Ngannou. And your division is in such a terrible position, you can't sit there and say we don't need him. You desperately need him. Or anyone to try and bolster the flagging ranks of what should be one of the marquee divisions in the sport. I can't stress this enough, man. Tai Tuivasa is still ranked. Tai Tuivasa's last win was February of 2022 against Derek Lewis. He's on a 5-fight losing streak. Excuse me. Yeah, 5-fight losing streak. And if you've seen him recently, yeah, yeesh. That dude is not really coming back. This is what we're dealing with here. It's pathetic. And you're going to sit there and say, I don't want one of a potential marquee draw, the lineal heavyweight champion of the UFC. And because you don't like a guy who advocates for himself on the financial side of things. Golly. This is where we are. Because, hey, somebody want to tell me how this monopolistic practice is benefiting the fans? The UFC used to make the argument that we give the fans the fights they want. I don't recall seeing Brock and Randy. I don't recall seeing George St. Pierre and Anderson Silva. I don't recall Jon Jones and Francis Ngannou. I don't recall Jon Jones and Tom Aspinall. And now, doesn't look like I'm going to get something like Tom Aspinall and Francis Ngannou either. The UFC's ability to reliably make the big fights that fans want really kind of dies at around the Donald Cerrone level of celebrity and success. It is just... God, this is going to get me heated. Because your division is crap. Somebody mentioned, like, Tom Aspinall is going to wind up having, like, 20 title defenses. This is exaggerated. He's going to have a boatload of title defenses, but the best name on there is going to be Cyril Gahn. There's a non-trivial chance that that's kind of accurate. Like, Tom Aspinall's real good. He's already beaten a lot of good guys. He's going to beat more. But most of them aren't really going to be all that good. Because that's where we are. Athletes are not, it's not necessary for them to take the UFC's crappy pay structure anymore. Another thing that came out about this, related to the Francis point, that's why I'm bringing it up. Dana White mentioned that, like, yeah, with the rights deal we're looking for, we might double the amount of Dana White Contender Series fights. This is MMA in 2025. At a press conference halfway around the world in Azerbaijan, where the UFC is because the government gave them a bunch of money for a site fee. One of the greatest of all time is announced as having retired with no fanfare. At the same time, the head of the UFC says, no, I don't want one of the best heavyweights in the world to be under this banner, to be under our banner, because I have a petty, bitter grudge and personality. And by the way, the puppy mill we are meat grinding our way through is going to be doubled. MMA in 2025. There's not a better encapsulation of it. There just isn't. And I don't know what to do about it. I don't know what to say about it. I don't know. I've got nothing. I've just got nothing for the state of this company, what the guaranteed revenue streams have done to their willingness and passion for making fights, what the TKO merger has done to just trying to put things on autopilot. I don't know. It's not good. None of that is good. Jon Jones retiring is not... Jack Slack pointed this out. It's even more embarrassing when you remember the UFC stretched all this out in desperation to try and save a fight between Jon and Tom because it's one of the only fights they can make that would do more than 400,000 pay-per-view buys. If that these days, because pay-per-view is locked behind the paywall on ESPN+. I don't know what I don't know what to say. I'm gonna move on, but none of that's good. Look, it's gotten to the point where I'm not gonna miss Jon. Like, he's fought so infrequently over the last 6 years that I'm not gonna miss him on the going forward necessarily. Would have loved to have seen him fight Francis. Would have loved to have seen him fight Tom Aspinall. Legitimately, but I've seen his entire UFC career. I've seen some of the trajectories. If he's done, God bless. Go get your life sorted out, please, for the sake of yourself and your loved ones. But I'm not going to miss, the whole thing there. I'm just not. All right. Yeah, let me talk about this a little bit, I guess. So speaking of things I don't miss, Conor McGregor got into an altercation in a nightclub in Spain and punched somebody in the face a couple of times. I don't miss Conor. I don't want Conor to ever come back. I don't like talking about Conor McGregor. I only bring this up because it actually is kind of a big deal. Well, not a big deal. This is more indicative of, like, I don't... Why? I heard Luke Thomas ask this question. I think it's relevant. Why do you want Conor back at this point? If you're out there, do. Conor McGregor has been this weird vortex of negativity and headaches and all that crap longer than he was a benefit to the sport. Right? Let's take half a second here, okay? Just bear with me for half a second, and let's talk about Conor McGregor's history just in the cage, okay? I'm going to do the same thing for him that I'll do for others. I'll set aside the vast majority of the BS from outside the cage. All right? The last time Conor McGregor won a meaningful fight was his title win against Eddie Alvarez at UFC 205. That was November of 2016. We are almost a decade removed from Conor McGregor being a benefit to the sport and at the pinnacle of it. If you want to talk just about the buy rate he generated, okay, maybe we go to the Khabib fight. So that's October of 18. That's still a loss. B was really ugly. Like the build of that, I'm saying this because that's kind of what we're talking about in some respects here. Why do you want Conor back? The magic is a decade old. His title win over Jose Aldo was December of 2015. We are coming up on the 10-year mark from that. The magic's gone. That version of him is gone. We're a decade removed from any of that. We're over 5 years removed from his last win at all, which was over Donald Cerrone. 5 years removed from that. Think about it. What does he give? What does he bring? Fans? I don't think he does at this point. Some excellence in MMA technically? No, not for a long time. There's no real value to him coming back. He's not going to recapture the magic. He's not going to be that guy. He's going to be who he is now, which is closer to 40, suffered a string of injuries, been on all kinds of juice, some of it perfectly legitimate to try and help heal from the injuries, with a boatload of baggage, being found liable for sexual assault, having a few other charges levied against him, now multiple times on camera assaulting people. I just have to go with there's nothing of value there anymore for MMA. Nothing. Just nothing. All right. Last thing, let me end on a slightly more positive note, if at all possible. So UFC on ABC 9. This is their the next card in Abu Dhabi. So this will be July 26th. Has really kind of taken shape. So we knew for a while the main event was Robert Whittaker and René de Ridder. We're also getting Shara Magomedov and Marc-Andre Barrio. I don't care. Nikita Krylov and Bogdan Gushkov. I don't care. Asiel Mabayev and Ramazan Temirov. That's a good fight. Also announced for this card, some of the reason I want to talk about it. Bryce Mitchell dropping down to bantamweight to fight Said Nurmagomedov. Mitchell at bantamweight is moderately interesting. I don't like his chances against Nurmagomedov all that much, but we'll see. Already announced for this one, Petr Yan and Marcus McGee, which is a really weird fight in a lot of respects. And confirmed recently was Movsar Evloev and Aaron Pico. Evloev should be getting a title shot. Pico in the UFC I am moderately interested in. I think this is a tough first fight for him. I'd almost rather he was fighting Yair Rodriguez and Evloev was getting the title shot because that still seems to be what the UFC's circling. But Evloev and Pico is a fine fight. Pico in the UFC, kind of good. So there's still some stuff to be sorted out there. I think we'll probably get a couple of more fights for that card before it's all said and done. But yeah, that one's shaping up, so wanted to mention that. Yeah, I think that's it for like sort of fight announcements. They were a little bit quiet about that. We'll probably get a lot more for 317 because they try to put like some of these bigger announcements and whatnot around events that are bigger deals. So we'll keep an eye out for that. We always do. All right, I'm going to check the old social medias because it is late and I am tired. And if there's nothing fight related to talk about, we will do plugs and get out of here. Okay, nope, I don't see anything there related to combat sports. Plenty about the geopolitical situation, but you're not here for that, so we're going to leave that alone. Plugs. All right, so Monday, Damn You Hollywood will be myself, Mark Radulich, and I think Alexis. It's been a minute since she's been on the show. Yeah, Alexis Hana will be there. We will be discussing Elio, the Pixar movie that is really struggling. If you're wondering, will we ever be discussing the winner of the box office this weekend, 28 years later? Yes. That will be tackled August 11th as part of a long road to ruin with the rest of the 28 Days franchise. So we will get to that this year in a moderately timely fashion. Moderately timely, I stress. So, yeah, again, Elio, let's see, do I have anything else this week on the podcast front? That is not the triple feature I'll be involved in. No. Okay. Yeah, that's it on the podcast front. On the coverage front, WWE SmackDown on Friday, per usual. UFC 317 on Saturday. Next week, we will be back here, and we will review UFC 317, and we will preview... Wait, we're taking a week off? Because the next event is the one in Tennessee, headlined by Derek Lewis versus Talashin Teixeira, because we're still doing Derek Lewis main events in 2025 for some godforsaken reason. But that's the 12th. Yeah, okay, they'll be taking off the next week because it's too close to the 4th of July. So no preview next week. All right, just the review and, of course, whatever major news happens to come out of UFC 317. I expect there to be certainly some. All right. That will do it for this week. Thank you all very, very much for listening. I appreciate the heck out of it. The fact that anyone listens to my rambling. So thank you. I can't thank you enough. Sincerely. All right. As I said, that's it. Stay safe out there. See you next time. Until then, continue to be well, be safe, and behave.